So vulnerability has become a really hot buzzword, and I think in general it's a really good thing, but there are some situations where you don't want to be vulnerable. And my name is Leah Chantel, and I'm going to elaborate on that in just a moment. But first, I just want to invite you to join my self-love group and say that that's a safe space to be vulnerable. I've set it up that way. It's private, so if you join that group on Facebook, that is the perfect place to heal. That is your supportive group of people, and that's where it can be wonderful to be vulnerable. And there are many loving, kind, supportive groups where you can be vulnerable, and it's a good thing. But there are some situations where it's not wise to be vulnerable. And I think we do people a disservice if we tell people to be vulnerable all the time with all people. It's just not wise, because there are nice narcissistic people, there are master manipulators out there, and there is more and more information that's negative that's being spread around the internet on how to manipulate people to get what you want. Unfortunately, that's just part of the internet. Both information that's good and bad gets spread around. So in one sense, it's good because the good people find the good information and then they become better. But then there are some nasty people out there who also find the negative information and then they become even more manipulative, even more nasty. So how do we protect ourselves from people who may potentially break our hearts and manipulate us, and be prepared in a sense to evaluate who is who in our lives? And at the deepest level, we are all one. I do truly believe that. There are just some situations that can be avoided if we're a little bit proactive and we observe people. And that's what I'm encouraging. I'm not telling you to judge people. What I am saying is to be proactive, observe them, and so you're going to avoid some of the obvious master manipulators. Now, as a woman, in my certain life situation, there are gentlemen out there who read things like the code or player handbooks, because they're trying to get information in order to sleep with women with as little commitment, as little effort as possible. And yeah, that puts me in a very complicated situation as a woman, because sometimes I don't always know who to trust when a gentleman approaches. I want to be kind, I want to be nice, but if I don't have strong enough boundaries, sometimes there could be the wrong gentleman that comes into my life and disappears. And so what do I do to have strong boundaries? So when you're dating, you have to be really careful about your sense of vulnerability. I would say that's one of the key areas of your life. You need to be cautious, and same with bosses and workplaces. That's another relationship where you just need to be a little bit cautious. I'm not saying it's impossible to be vulnerable with these groups of people. What I'm saying is, over time, you should observe the relationship and build trust. And that can take a long time sometimes to observe and see how this person actually is and if they're ready for vulnerable feedback. For example, I'm thinking about this company I used to work for, and to say the good thing about this company is they did actually ask for feedback. Wonderful, wonderful practice. They have forms of saying, how can we improve things? What can we do to be better as a company? And that's lovely, lovely, great idea. And I really commend that company on that. What I observed as an employee, though, is when you actually submit your feedback and actually say, this can be improved, that can be improved, it was pretty much ignored. Like nothing was done about it. So in the same way, some people will say it's okay for you to be vulnerable, and they'll say it's okay for you to have feedback, but they don't actually mean it. So what do you do? Like, for example, a lot of gentlemen will say, you can be vulnerable with me, you can tell me what's on your mind, and really what they're trying to do is seduce you, They're not really interested in a long-term relationship. They're trying to get you to open up so you feel more connected and you're more likely to sleep with them early on. And so what do you do to guard against that? Well, there's a couple of things you can do. You can say, I don't feel ready to talk about that yet. That's a good thing to say. But you could also kind of give them a story that you don't feel so vulnerable about. Like, it's kind of like when you're asked in the job interview, what's your weakness? And then you say, I work too hard. It's kind of like that answer that sounds like a weakness, but it's actually a strength. You can give that kind of response to a gentleman too, and you can see what he does with it. So let's say, for example, my story of vulnerability on my date would be something, when he asks, would be something like, when I was in grade 4, my teacher embarrassed me in front of the class, and I felt super uncomfortable coming to class for the rest of the year. And it can be kind of like a simple story like that, but it doesn't actually really bother you. It doesn't really have a lot of juice. You see what I mean? Just like have a story like that ready and see what happens with it. Because later down the line, so this is what sometimes manipulators will do in fights, they'll invite you to become vulnerable, and then they remember that vulnerable information, and when you're in a fight, they will use that against you. They'll say something like, oh, you're no good, just like your 4th grade teacher said so. You see what I mean? And so if you give them a piece of information that's not that vulnerable, you can kind of test it out over time and see if they bring it up in a fight. If it comes up in a fight, you know that they are not safe people to share vulnerable information with. You see what I mean? So these are just a couple of tips to kind of evaluate over time and see if people are really truly worthy of your vulnerability, or if they're just blowing smoke up your butt. You know, pardon me for saying that, but it's true. There are companies, there are bosses who will say they want feedback and they really don't. And in the same way, there are men who want to date you who say they really care about you and they don't. So that's up to you as a woman to take responsibility for that and observe people and evaluate and see if what they're saying is actually genuine. You know, don't take it at face value. I mean, it's lovely that they're trying to put that sentiment out there, but don't jump into anything too quick, you know, without testing it out, and seeing if what they're saying matches up with what they do, if that makes sense. I hope you're all having a wonderful, beautiful day, and I hope these tips and tools were helpful for you, and I hope you enjoyed my perspective on vulnerability and how to kind of test situations out and avoid nasty situations that you don't need to be in, just with a little bit of thoughtfulness. I hope you're having a great day. Bye now.